Okay, last try. There's probably like 3 little 2-second videos on my timeline now. We are finishing our session on Judaism in the New Testament, and I want to thank everybody for their patience this week. Okay, as the class was getting ready to start, there were questions about the biography of Jesus as a person. Again, it's off the topic of what the class is supposed to do, but suffice it to say that the Gospel of Matthew and other locations have a vested interest in tracing a patrilineal genealogy to King David, which would, of course, resonate in the Jewish world as making him eligible as a messianic figure. On the other hand, they also go to great pains to be clear that that same father is not his father. The theology of Jesus in the Christian church is that this is immaculate conception, which means Mary was impregnated as a virgin without normal interaction with her husband, and that seed is the holy seed that comes from God, and therefore he is born miraculously and destined for greatness. That's the essence of the Trinity, that there's a Father, there's a Son, and there's the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, and that those three as one are the same being, completely divine. And in the person of Jesus, the teaching of the church is completely human and completely divine. So for modern Christians and Jews relating to each other, Jews really, unless the Christian takes the lead and says they personally don't believe that, you have to just work with the assumption that you're not dealing with a prophet, you're not dealing with a person or a teacher or a rabbi. That would be how you relate to this person historically, but that's not how you can presume a Christian will relate to Jesus historically. They will be relating to Jesus as God. And many Jews are kind of surprised to hear that. Their prayers are addressed to Jesus as God. Jesus is God in the church. Okay, so you have to just take that. That's the essence of Christianity. Anything short of that is either going to be a rarer form of Christianity, or it's really not Christianity in that sense. Okay? So, in any event, let's do what we're going to do this week. So now we're in trouble, because I wandered the first 2 weeks with the Sermon on the Mount a little too long, and now this week's 90 minutes has been cut to 60 minutes. So I have to leave the Sermon on the Mount behind now, because we have a couple other things that we want to cover. To sum up what we've seen so far, Jesus was teaching not on radical topics, but was teaching out of the mainstream views on those mainstream topics. So Jesus was teaching about divorce, and his point of view was neither in accordance with Hillel or Shammai or anyone else in the Jewish record by outlawing it completely and calling it adultery. Jesus was teaching about tzedakah in ways that were relatively extreme. He gave various teachings about giving up all of your worldly possessions and so forth. Jesus spoke about vows in a relatively extreme way, in that the Torah allows vows. The Torah tries to control vows. The Torah allows a woman's vows to be uprooted by her husband. But the Torah also says, you know what, if you don't vow, that would be better because you won't sin. And that's the point of view that Jesus takes even further. You should not make vows, which, by the way, becomes mainstream rabbinic Judaism in the early Talmudic age. So these are not heretical kinds of things. So there's a variety of teachings which would have resonated with the hot topics of the day in the Jewish milieu. And he was teaching where he was quoting Torah and then contradicting that Torah without saying that it was Torah and without saying that it was from Moses or God. So there is an argument about what his knowledge base was and what his agenda was. Does he give paraphrase of those Torah teachings because he doesn't know the original verses? Does he give paraphrases because he knows them all too well and he's summarizing the essence of them so that he can then turn them over? You know, what's going on there? Does he give paraphrases because he doesn't have all the Torah books in his background? We saw that he seems to clearly be knowledgeable of Hillel and Shammai. He's knowledgeable of Devarim. He's knowledgeable of Leviticus. He never talks about Genesis. Nothing in Genesis comes up in the Christian Bible of importance. The original story of us as a people doesn't seem to be what's interesting to him. Whereas of course, Genesis and Exodus are our primary stories because they identify us as unique and different within the larger human race. Right? So Genesis and Exodus are really important to us. Doesn't seem to have been what he was worried about. And of course, the church sees that message as universal, which explains why he wouldn't care about a parochial family story that makes us different from other people. So he really dives into what does it mean to be holy and so forth. Now, what have we not gone into? We are leaving out an entire swath, chapter and chapter and chapter of the 3 synoptic gospels where there are miracle cure stories and other miracles. And a Christian who wants to be upset with my presentation would say, if you don't give the proof, then of course no one's going to believe, and you're the one keeping them away from Jesus and salvation. Okay. It's not my agenda to bring you to Jesus and salvation in that way. My way is to help you understand that Judaism is its own path to salvation and that we should understand how we appear in the Christian Bible, and that's all good enough for me. The fact is there are many, many miracle stories and miracle cures, including one, resurrection of the dead. I would say about a third of them, roughly speaking, have parallels in the Hebrew Bible among our prophets. And the rest are unique to his own stories. But they're really not our point. There's one other story that I didn't get to that I'll just summarize for you rather than reading, which is very important, and that is the story of what his disciples do on Shabbat. There is a story in the Synoptic Gospels that his disciples are walking along in the fields on Shabbat, and they are hungry. Right? And so what do? They pick among the fields, from the wheat or the barley or the fruit, it's ears of grain. We don't really know which it is. It doesn't matter which it is, because Judaism doesn't permit one and not the other to be harvested on Shabbat. They pick them, they eat them, and they are soundly criticized by the Pharisees, the rabbis, rabbinic Judaism, for having desecrated Shabbat. And they ask Jesus what he thinks, and the Pharisees ask Jesus what he thinks of his followers' behavior, and he basically says, what do you think is more important, people or Shabbos? And that's his answer. Okay? So, as far as background now, what has happened that will make the Sanhedrin, the institution of rabbinic law, interpreting Torah law in Jerusalem at this time, what has happened that will make them upset or worried or concerned or think that it is their job to investigate the matter further? Can anyone give me a quick summary?
It's contradicting the Torah.
So it's contradicting the Torah. Okay? That's a problem. And specifically, is the oaths thing a problem? No, oaths aren't a problem. Is his telling people to give their money away a problem? No. Is his saying that people who pray in synagogues in the streets are hypocrites if they do it publicly, blow shofars and beat themselves on the chest? They shouldn't be believed. You should be someone who prays in your room and has a pure heart?
No.
That's not a legal problem. I think they probably would have been offended, but yes.
But that could be a problem because we pray as a group and they have a meeting, you need 10 people, so you can't do that privately by yourself.
Okay, so if he's telling people don't make the minyan, or you don't need a minyan to read the Torah, then he's starting to break laws again. But what? So there's some of these things that they would just look at him and say you're weird. There's some of these things they would look and say, you know, that's against the Torah, right? And then there's other things that are just offensive to the ethos of Pharisaic rabbinic Judaism and how we structure and form our communities and behave. So he's critical of the form of our community, the form of our prayer. He's teaching law that is not in step with the main law. Most of it's not a problem, but a couple of them are direct contradictions. And when you have direct contradictions with things that affect other people, then the government gets involved. Telling people they can't divorce, that's going to get people involved. Telling somebody you can't marry her because she's divorced, she's an adulteress, you can't marry her, now that's a problem, right? You could have a lawsuit when you do things like that. So the government's going to get involved. Breaking Shabbat, that's huge. The essence of Judaism is Shabbat and temple and holidays and agriculture at this day. So breaking Shabbat is absolutely not going to be overlooked if it's happening publicly as a group being taught by a leader. Okay? If a person breaks Shabbat, they're not getting pulled in front of the Sanhedrin. Right? Nobody's getting pulled in front of a Beit Din for breaking Shabbat at this time in this place. But if it's a movement of people publicly doing it and so forth, and it's somebody who's already on your radar as a troublemaker, it becomes a topic. Okay? So I want to do a couple of things. We don't have time to do the trials of Jesus. I'm going to pass out a piece of paper that summarizes and tells you where in these books those trials take place. Jesus gets ping-ponged back and forth in his final day or two between the Jewish authorities, the Roman appointed pseudo-Jewish authorities, and Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. And so he gets arrested, and then he gets moved from court to court to court. There seems to be a great deal of confusion over who has jurisdiction over this guy. And the main reason is because nobody can figure out if he's done anything wrong. Okay? I think they all seem to agree that he's either a problem or that somebody else thinks that he's a problem, but he gets moved around a lot. So there's one way to read this where there's 3 different kind of Jewish trials and 3 different appearances in front of Rome. The Jewish trials tend to be the Sanhedrin or the Pharisees, people who are pulling him in and asking him questions. And the questions they ask are the ones that we've covered. You say that a person can't divorce, but, the Torah says this, and he reaffirms what he's done. You say that your followers can, go and do this on Shabbat. He reaffirms what he's done. And then they try and trip him up with the people say you are the Son of God and Messiah. Now, of these 3, what do you think would be most likely the death penalty offense if the Sanhedrin was in the business of doing death penalty? The Messiah, Son of God thing. Right? If he's saying he's Messiah, Son of God, that certainly would have been very difficult for the local Jewish authorities to overlook. If he's already got a rap sheet that he's doing a bunch of other things, it would be impossible for them to overlook that. Right? Especially if he walks into Jerusalem and does it on Passover. Okay? If he's sitting on the hill overlooking Capernaum off the Sea of the Galilee and proclaims himself Messiah, Son of God, whoop-de-doo. Okay, there's a guy up there in the Galilee, he does things, maybe he's going to build a little sweat house or something, whatever, he's going to have his own little group, and that's a fine place for him. Right? That wouldn't have been something that but once you come down and you're in Jerusalem on the pilgrimage holiday, at a time of Roman persecution, with dissent and foment among the different streams of Judaism, and you're there, and now you proclaim yourself Messiah and Son of God, you're just not going to have a good outcome. You can't expect a positive outcome from this chain of events. So one of the things that we do in Judaism is, because there has been thousands of years of anti-Semitism out of the church that is based in an accusation of deicide, the killing of God, and that because the Gospel of John has an interaction with the Jews, the mob, and they are warned by Pilate that the death of this man will be on your hands, not on mine, and they say, let it be on our hands and on our children, which is what the Gospel of John does, that therefore the elements of the church and anti-Semites, religious anti-Semites today, take those quotes and say, therefore all Jews are guilty of not only the rejection of Messiah, but the murder of God. And what they get, they deserve, is usually the next conclusion by an anti-Semite using these texts. So who is responsible for the death is going to be an interesting question from the point of view of what was the Judaism of the day. Okay, what was the Judaism of the day? So you have three authorities. You have the Roman governor who could do whatever the heck he wanted. He had tens of thousands of troops, and at this time Pontius Pilate is known for crucifying and executing thousands of people, according to some reports, on a daily or weekly basis. Okay, this is not a nice guy. The idea that he would sit with a bowl of water and enact some Jewish ritual of cleansing, al nitilat yadayim, washing his hands of the blood, and I'm innocent of this poor man, you rabble I want to keep happy, is a completely false historical setting for the behavior of Pontius Pilate and his interaction with the Jewish populace at that time. No historical source would validate that dynamic on any level. But that's accentuated in the Gospel of John, which seems to be written for a non-Jewish audience 100 years later. So it's written, to the Roman Empire, and to make the Roman rulers the innocents and the Jews the bad guys and proclaim the risen Christ is certainly an agenda that John would engage in. So you get the worst views of the Jews in the passion and the execution of Jesus in the Gospel of John. The farther away from the Jewish eyewitness population you get with these Gospels, the more we become kind of stereotypes for accusation. Okay, so I'm going to follow that up. The second authority is Herod, who is a half-Jewish king appointed by the Romans. So he's the Jewish king in the province at this time. He's the one who does things like expand the Temple Mount.